Every parent knows the crushing weight of watching their child's potential slip away while bills pile up on the kitchen table. Henry Fowler has felt that weight for 8 months, clutching 47 rejection letters while his 11-year-old daughter, Emma, still believes her daddy can fix anything. He's been cleaning office buildings at night, barely making ends meet, when his application for a janitor position at TechNova Industries changes everything. The CEO, Victoria Sterling, notices something extraordinary in the way Henry fixes a broken ventilation system during his interview. Engineering brilliance hidden beneath desperation. What happens next transforms both their lives in ways that challenge everything we think we know about talent, opportunity, and the hidden genius that exists in the most unexpected places. Before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if stories of hidden potential inspire you, make sure you're subscribed, because we have more life-changing tales to share. The alarm clock's piercing cry shattered the pre-dawn silence of apartment 2A at exactly 5:15 a.m., 3 minutes before Henry Fowler would have preferred to wake up. But preference had become a luxury he couldn't afford, filed away in the same mental space as weekend sleep-ins and grocery shopping without calculating every dollar twice. He rolled over in the narrow bed, his hand instinctively reaching for the space where Rebecca used to sleep, finding only cool sheets and the lingering ache of 18 months' worth of mornings without her gentle breathing beside him. The cardboard box under his side of the bed seemed to pulse with its own gravitational pull through the thin mattress. Inside, 47 rejection letters lay stacked like a deck of cards dealt by an unforgiving fate. Each one followed the same cruel script. Thank you for your interest in the position. Unfortunately, we have decided to pursue other candidates. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Future endeavors. The phrase had become a bitter joke, as if luck was something you could manufacture in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the heating worked sporadically and the water pressure depended on how many neighbors were showering simultaneously. Henry swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his bare feet meeting the cold linoleum floor that had seemed charming when he and Rebecca first viewed the apartment 7 years ago. Back then, her hand warm in his as they imagined Emma taking her first steps in the narrow hallway, the space had felt full of possibility. Now, with Emma sleeping on a fold-out couch in what generously passed for a living room, every square foot served as a constant reminder of promises he couldn't keep. Through the paper-thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Patterson from 2B beginning her morning routine, the familiar sounds of running water and cabinet doors opening and closing in careful sequence. She would be preparing breakfast for her twin grandsons, 8-year-old boys who'd been living with her since their mother died in a workplace accident at the textile factory. The thought struck Henry with uncomfortable familiarity. How many single guardians lived in this building, held together by necessity and the kind of quiet strength that never made headlines? Emma stirred on the couch, her small form barely making an impression in the cushions. At 11 years old, she possessed an unsettling combination of childlike wonder and adult wisdom that made Henry's heart ache with fierce protectiveness. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, spread across the pillow like silk threads catching the weak morning light filtering through their one decent window. She had Rebecca's eyes too, deep brown and expressive, capable of conveying entire conversations with a single glance. "Morning, Daddy," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep but somehow already cheerful. Emma had perfected the art of waking up happy, a skill that Henry suspected was both natural gift and learned survival mechanism. She understood, in the way children do, that her father needed her brightness to navigate the darkness of their circumstances. "Morning, sunshine," he replied, his voice automatically softening into the tone reserved exclusively for her. This was their ritual, the gentle transition from night's worries to day's possibilities. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, already sitting up and folding the blanket with the precision of someone who'd learned that taking care of things made them last longer. "I dreamed about the science fair again, the one with the robotics competition." She paused, studying his face with the kind of careful attention that children develop when they've learned to read their parents' moods. "Do you think we'll have enough money for the entry fee this year?" The question hit Henry like a physical blow. The science fair entry fee was $35. A sum that might as well have been $35,000 given their current financial state. Emma had been talking about the robotics competition for months, sketching designs in notebooks and researching servo motors at the library during her after-school program. Her engineering teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, had specifically mentioned that Emma showed unusual aptitude for mechanical problem-solving, the kind of natural talent that should be nurtured and developed. "We'll figure something out," Henry said, falling back on the phrase that had become his default response to Emma's dreams that required resources they didn't have. "We always do." The lie felt heavier each time he told it. They didn't always figure things out. Sometimes dreams got deferred, opportunities passed by, and potential remained unrealized, because the mathematics of poverty were unforgiving. But Emma needed to believe in possibilities, even when those possibilities seemed increasingly remote. He moved to the kitchenette, a generous term for the corner that contained a mini-fridge, a 2-burner stove, and cabinets that seemed to shrink a little more each month. The coffee maker was a wedding gift from Rebecca's sister, one of the few items that had survived their transition from a real house to this place. He filled it with water, counting out coffee grounds with the precision of someone who knew exactly how many scoops could stretch a bag through the week. "What's for breakfast?" Emma asked, though they both knew the answer. Cereal if they were lucky, toast if they weren't. The milk in the refrigerator had 3 days left before its expiration date, and the grocery money wouldn't refresh until Friday. "How about we make it an adventure?" Henry suggested, falling back on the game they'd developed to make scarcity feel like choice. "What would engineers eat for breakfast?" Emma's eyes lit up with the theatrical delight of someone who understood the value of imagination. Protein bars and energy drinks to fuel their brains for solving complex problems. "I think we've got some toast that could pass for engineer fuel," Henry said, opening the bread bag and discovering exactly 4 slices remaining. "Captain Emma, reporting for duty." As she giggled and saluted him with exaggerated formality, Henry felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied moments of joy. How long could he keep this up? How long before Emma realized that other kids didn't have to pretend their breakfast was an adventure because their fathers couldn't afford anything better? The shower ran cold after 6 minutes, another reminder that their building's infrastructure was held together by hope and the landlord's reluctance to invest in actual repairs. Henry had learned to wash efficiently, the way soldiers might conserve water during deployments. Every aspect of their life had become an exercise in conservation: heat, water, food, hope, all carefully rationed to last as long as possible. Emma was dressed and ready by the time he emerged, her backpack packed with the same methodical care she applied to everything else. Her school clothes were clean but showing wear, the kind of wear that other parents might not notice, but that made Henry's jaw clench with frustration. She deserved new clothes and fresh school supplies, and the confidence that came with not having to worry about whether her father could afford the field trip fee. "Ready for school?" he asked, though the question was more for himself than for her. "Always," she replied, and meant it. Education was the one thing they both believed in unconditionally, the ladder that might eventually lead them out of apartment 2A and into the kind of life Rebecca had dreamed about for their daughter. Today would bring another rejection letter, another reminder that despite his mechanical engineering degree from State University, despite his years of experience before Rebecca's illness destroyed their savings, the employment market seemed determined to keep him on the outside looking in. But Emma would walk through the doors of Lincoln Elementary with her head held high, believing that her father was capable of miracles. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The walk to Lincoln Elementary took 14 minutes, a journey that had become Henry and Emma's daily meditation through the tree-lined streets of Riverside Heights. It was one of those neighborhoods caught between gentrification and decay, where century-old oak trees shaded sidewalks cracked by their roots, and modest craftsman houses sat next to modern condos that cost more per month than Henry made in 3. Emma chatted about her upcoming presentation on renewable energy systems, her voice animated as she described the wind turbine design she'd sketched during lunch period. "Mrs. Campbell says my calculations for energy output are actually quite sophisticated for my grade level," she said, swinging her backpack with the casual pride of someone who'd never doubted her own intelligence. "She thinks I should consider applying for the advanced STEM track next year." The advanced STEM track. Henry knew it meant additional fees, specialized materials, and probably a laptop computer that might as well have been made of platinum given their current financial situation. But he also knew that Emma's mind worked differently than most kids her age, seeing patterns and solutions that escaped others, approaching problems with the systematic thinking of someone born to be an engineer. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity," he said, meaning every word while simultaneously calculating whether he could pick up additional cleaning shifts to cover the costs. After dropping Emma off at the red brick building that had become as familiar as his own reflection, Henry returned to his aging Honda Civic and opened the job search app on his cracked phone screen. The device was 3 generations behind current technology, but it functioned well enough to display the endless stream of positions that seemed designed to remind him of everything he wasn't qualified for. Senior Software Engineer, 5+ years experience required. Systems Analyst, Advanced Certifications preferred. Project Manager MBA strongly desired. Each posting felt like a door slamming shut, another confirmation that his mechanical engineering degree from 15 years ago had somehow become obsolete during the months he'd spent caring for Rebecca during her final illness. The cleaning service where he worked nights was run by a man named Carlos Mendez, a former aerospace engineer who'd started Sacramento Valley Cleaning after his own corporate layoff had stretched into permanent unemployment. Carlos understood the particular humiliation that came with having advanced degrees and cleaning other people's offices, the cognitive dissonance of possessing expertise that the world seemed determined to ignore. "Any luck with the applications?" Carlos asked when Henry arrived at the service's modest headquarters, a converted garage behind Carlos's house where industrial cleaning supplies shared space with the remnants of his former engineering career. Textbooks, certificates, and awards that now served as expensive reminders of another life. 47 rejections and counting, Henry replied, pulling on the navy blue uniform that identified him as maintenance staff rather than the mechanical engineer he'd trained to be. "I've got an interview this afternoon for a janitor position at TechNova Industries. Night shift, but the pay is better than what most places offer." Carlos nodded with the understanding of someone who'd traveled the same path. "TechNova's a good company. They treat their people well, and they're expanding their research division. Who knows? Maybe you'll get a chance to show them what you can really do." The comment was meant to be encouraging, but it highlighted the fundamental absurdity of Henry's situation. He possessed a degree in mechanical engineering, had spent 8 years designing HVAC systems for commercial buildings, and had once been considered for a project management position at a major construction firm. Now he was hoping for a chance to empty wastebaskets and mop floors, grateful for any opportunity to earn enough money to keep Emma in school and their apartment rent current. The morning shift took him to 3 different office buildings in the downtown core, each one a monument to the kind of success that seemed increasingly distant from his own reality. Glass towers, where people in expensive suits discussed quarterly projections and market strategies, where the coffee cost more than Henry's lunch budget and the office supplies probably exceeded his monthly income. At Meridian Financial Services, he cleaned the conference room where the quarterly board meeting had just concluded, gathering scattered papers and wiping down surfaces that had hosted decisions affecting thousands of employees. One document caught his attention, a technical specification for upgrading the building's climate control system. Henry found himself automatically analyzing the proposed modifications, mentally noting inefficiencies in the design, and calculating potential improvements that could reduce energy consumption by nearly 20%. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine walking into that conference room as a consultant rather than custodial staff, presenting solutions instead of emptying trash cans. But the fantasy dissolved as quickly as it had formed, replaced by the practical reality that he needed to finish this job and move on to the next building before his interview at TechNova. The rejection letters in the box under his bed represented more than just missed opportunities. They were proof that despite his willingness to work any job, despite his desperation to provide for Emma, despite his genuine expertise in mechanical systems, the world kept saying no. Each form letter was another reminder that somewhere in the gap between his last real engineering job and his current circumstances, he'd become invisible to the people who made hiring decisions. But Emma would be walking out of Lincoln Elementary in 6 hours, and she would ask about his day with genuine interest and unshakable faith in his ability to take care of them both. That faith was both his greatest motivation and his heaviest burden. She believed in him in a way that made him want to believe in himself, even when the evidence suggested that belief might be misplaced. The TechNova Industries building rose 32 stories above downtown Sacramento, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun like a beacon of possibility. Henry had researched the company thoroughly, learning that they specialized in environmental control systems for large-scale industrial applications. Exactly the kind of work he'd done before Rebecca's diagnosis had derailed his career. As he sat in the parking garage, reviewing his resume one more time, Henry caught sight of Emma's latest drawing taped to his dashboard. She'd sketched their apartment building, but with solar panels on the roof and wind turbines in the courtyard, transforming their modest complex into a model of sustainable energy. At the bottom, she'd written, "Daddy's next project," in her careful, cursive handwriting. The drawing was both heartbreaking and inspiring, evidence of Emma's absolute faith that her father could solve any problem, improve any situation, transform any challenge into an opportunity. She saw him not as a desperate man applying for janitorial work, but as an engineer, capable of creating solutions that could change the world. Maybe it was time to start seeing himself the same way. The interview was scheduled for 3:30 p.m., which would give him just enough time to collect Emma from school and drop her off at Mrs. Patterson's apartment. Mrs. Patterson watched Emma for free on afternoons when Henry had interviews or needed to work extra shifts, part of the informal support network that kept single parents afloat in buildings like theirs. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma's teacher. "Emma's robotics project is exceptional. Please call when convenient to discuss advanced placement opportunities." Advanced placement opportunities. Another door opening just as Henry was trying to walk through others. Emma's potential was limitless, but potential required resources, support, and stability, all things that seemed perpetually just beyond his reach. As Henry drove toward Emma's school, he allowed himself a moment of quiet determination. This interview at TechNova wasn't just about a job. It was about proving that Emma's faith in her father wasn't misplaced, that sometimes the 48th opportunity was the one that changed everything. The cleaning supplies in his trunk represented his current reality, but the engineering textbooks hidden beneath them, the ones he studied late at night when Emma was sleeping, represented his refusal to accept that reality as permanent. Today, maybe someone would finally see what Emma had always known, that Henry Fowler was capable of far more than the world had been willing to acknowledge. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door of apartment 2A while Henry was preparing Emma's breakfast. Unlike the usual collection of pizza delivery flyers and discount grocery circulars that typically accumulated in their hallway, this envelope felt substantial, official, with the kind of weight that suggested either very good news or very bad news. Inside was a formal letter from TechNova Industries, printed on expensive letterhead that felt crisp between Henry's fingers. But instead of the familiar rejection language he'd memorized from 47 previous disappointments, the words seemed to dance with possibility. "We are pleased to invite you for a final interview for the position of Facilities Maintenance Specialist, Building Operations Division. Please report to the executive offices on the 28th floor at 2 p.m. Thursday." "What's that, Daddy?" Emma asked, looking up from her cereal bowl with the curiosity that seemed to be her default setting. "A callback interview," Henry replied, though the word, callback, felt insufficient to describe what this represented. After months of automated rejections and silence, someone had actually reviewed his application and decided he was worth a second look. "For the engineering job?" Emma asked, her eyes lighting up with the same excitement she'd shown when discussing her robotics project. "For a maintenance position," Henry corrected gently, not wanting to inflate her expectations. "But it's at a technology company, so there might be opportunities to learn about their systems." Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Mrs. Campbell says that every job teaches you something valuable, and sometimes what you learn is more important than what you earn." The wisdom of an 11-year-old filtered through her teacher's guidance hit Henry with unexpected force. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe this interview wasn't just about securing steady employment, but about positioning himself to demonstrate capabilities that had been dormant for too long. The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of nervous energy and preparation. Henry researched TechNova's recent projects, studied their corporate structure, and reviewed building maintenance protocols until he could recite emergency procedures from memory. But beneath the professional preparation was a deeper anxiety about whether 18 months of cleaning offices had somehow diminished his ability to think like an engineer. Wednesday brought an unexpected complication. Emma arrived home from school with a permission slip for the regional science fair, her face glowing with excitement and apprehension. Mr. Rodriguez says my wind turbine design is good enough to compete at the state level, she announced, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. But the entry fee is $65, and I need to submit it by Friday. $65. The amount seemed simultaneously trivial and impossible. Henry's checking account currently held $87, which needed to cover groceries, gas, and Emma's school lunch money for the rest of the week. But the look on his daughter's face, the mixture of hope and careful restraint, made the decision for him. "We'll figure it out," he said, meaning every word even as he mentally calculated which bills could be delayed without serious consequences. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of accumulated expectations. Henry had borrowed a decent shirt from Carlos, pressed his one good pair of pants until the creases could cut glass, and practiced interview responses until Emma had declared him definitely ready to impress everyone. The TechNova building seemed even more imposing in daylight, its glass facade reflecting the Sacramento skyline like a monument to technological achievement. Henry arrived 30 minutes early, using the extra time to walk around the building's perimeter and automatically assess its mechanical systems. The HVAC units visible on the roof were newer models, but he noticed inefficiencies in their placement that suggested the original installation had prioritized cost over optimal performance. The 28th floor housed the executive offices, a realm of polished marble and understated elegance that felt designed to impress visitors and intimidate supplicants. Henry announced himself to the receptionist, a professional woman who directed him to a comfortable waiting area, where industry magazines shared space with awards, recognizing TechNova's innovations in environmental control technology. "Mr. Fowler?" A voice called his name with the kind of crisp authority that suggested its owner was accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "I'm Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. Thank you for coming in today." Victoria Sterling was not what Henry had expected. Probably in her early 40s, she carried herself with the confident ease of someone who'd earned her position through competence rather than inheritance. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, and her manner suggested genuine interest rather than perfunctory politeness. "I've reviewed your application and your previous work history," she said, leading him toward a conference room that overlooked the city. "Your background in mechanical engineering is impressive, but I'm curious about the gap in your employment history." The question Henry had been dreading, the one that required him to explain how caring for his dying wife had somehow disqualified him from returning to his chosen profession. He'd practiced various responses, from clinical explanations to emotional appeals, but sitting across from Victoria Sterling, he found himself choosing simple honesty. "My wife was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer 3 years ago," he said, his voice steady despite the familiar tightness in his chest. "I took family leave to care for her during treatment, and after she passed, I needed time to help my daughter adjust to our new circumstances. By the time I was ready to return to engineering work, the industry had moved forward without me." Victoria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry for your loss. That must have been incredibly difficult for both of you." "Thank you. It was, but Emma, my daughter, she's remarkable. She's kept me focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on what we've lost." "Tell me about Emma," Victoria said, and something in her tone suggested this wasn't just polite conversation. Henry felt his face brighten, as it always did when discussing his daughter. "She's 11, and she's fascinated by engineering and renewable energy. She's designed a wind turbine for the state science fair that incorporates principles I didn't learn until my junior year of college. She sees solutions where other people see problems." "She sounds like she inherited her father's analytical mind," Victoria observed. "What kind of solutions does she see?" The question surprised Henry with its specificity. Most people asked about Emma out of politeness, but Victoria seemed genuinely interested in his daughter's perspective. "She's always asking why things work the way they do and whether they could work better. Last week, she suggested modifications to our apartment building's heating system that would reduce energy consumption by 30%. She's probably right." Victoria made a note on her tablet, then looked directly at Henry with the focused attention he remembered from his engineering career, when technical discussions required absolute precision. "Mr. Fowler, I'm going to be direct with you. We posted this position for facilities maintenance, but what we really need is someone who understands our systems well enough to optimize them rather than just maintain them." Henry felt his pulse quicken. What kind of optimization? "Our environmental control systems are state-of-the-art, but they're not performing at projected efficiency levels. We've had 3 different consulting firms analyze the problems, and each one has proposed expensive solutions that address symptoms rather than root causes. I need someone who can think like an engineer while understanding our systems from the ground up. The conversation had shifted from job interview to technical consultation, and Henry found himself leaning forward with the kind of engagement he hadn't felt in months. Have you considered that the issue might be integration rather than individual component performance? Most efficiency problems in complex systems stem from poor communication between subsystems. Victoria's eyes sharpened with interest. Explain. Modern buildings are essentially ecosystems, Henry said, his confidence growing as he moved into familiar territory. HVAC, lighting, security, communications. They're all connected, but they're usually designed and installed by different teams who don't coordinate their efforts. The result is systems that work individually but create conflicts when they interact. And you think you could identify these conflicts? I think anyone with mechanical engineering experience and access to your system documentation could identify them. The challenge isn't diagnosis. It's having the authority to implement comprehensive solutions rather than piecemeal fixes. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying Henry with the kind of calculation that suggested she was weighing possibilities he couldn't see. Mr. Fowler, I'm going to make you an offer that might sound unusual. Instead of the facility's maintenance position, I'd like you to consider a consulting role focused on system optimization. The pay would be significantly better, and the work would give you a chance to apply your engineering background to real problems. Henry felt the world tilt around him. A consulting role? A 6-month contract to start, with the possibility of permanent placement based on results. You'd work directly with our technical teams to analyze and improve building performance across our entire portfolio. The offer was so far beyond what Henry had imagined that he found himself looking for the catch, the fine print that would reveal this opportunity to be too good to be true. Why me? You could hire experienced consultants with current certifications and proven track records. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since the interview began, she seemed to relax slightly. Because experienced consultants think like consultants. They see problems in terms of billable hours and standard solutions. You think like someone who needs to make things work efficiently because efficiency matters. That's exactly the perspective we need. As Henry drove toward Emma's school, his mind raced through the implications of Victoria's offer. The salary she'd mentioned would allow them to move to a better apartment, cover Emma's science fair entry fee without stress, and perhaps most importantly, give him a chance to rebuild his engineering career on a foundation of actual accomplishment rather than desperate necessity. But more than the financial security, the opportunity represented something he'd begun to think was lost forever: the chance to use his mind for something more complex than determining the most efficient way to clean conference rooms. Victoria Sterling had seen past his current circumstances to recognize capabilities that Henry himself had started to doubt. Emma was waiting at the school entrance, her backpack heavy with homework and her face bright with anticipation. "How did the interview go?" she asked before he'd even reached her. "Better than I expected," Henry said, choosing understatement over the kind of excitement that might prove premature. "They offered me a different position than what I applied for." "A better position?" "Potentially much better. We'll know more next week." Emma studied his face with the careful attention she'd learned to apply when assessing her father's mood. "You look happy," she announced. "Actually happy, not just pretending to be happy for my benefit." "I am happy," Henry realized, surprised by the truth of the statement. "For the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely optimistic about what comes next. Does this mean I can enter the science fair?" "This means you're definitely entering the science fair. We'll figure out the entry fee, and if your design is as good as Mr. Rodriguez thinks it is, maybe we'll be going to the state competition too." Emma's squeal of delight drew curious looks from other parents, but Henry found himself not caring what anyone else thought. His daughter's joy was worth any amount of public attention, and for the first time since Rebecca's death, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. The 48th application had finally yielded something more than a form rejection. It had opened a door that Henry was ready to walk through, regardless of what waited on the other side. The Monday morning that would change everything began like any other, with Henry's alarm interrupting dreams of system schematics and Emma's cheerful voice calling from the kitchen about burned toast. 3 days had passed since Victoria Sterling's unexpected offer, and Henry had spent the weekend in a state of cautious optimism, reviewing mechanical engineering texts and researching TechNova's building portfolio, while Emma worked on her wind turbine calculations at the kitchen table. "Heh, Dad, your phone's buzzing," Emma announced, holding up the device with the careful reverence she applied to all technology. The caller ID showed TechNova Industries, and Henry felt his pulse quicken as he answered. "Mr. Fowler, this is Sarah Martinez from TechNova's Human Resources Department," a professional voice explained. "Miss Sterling would like you to come in this morning for a brief orientation and to sign your consulting contract. Would 10 a.m. work for your schedule?" Henry glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m. He'd planned to spend the morning submitting applications for backup positions, a precautionary measure that now seemed both unnecessary and pessimistic. 10 a.m. would be perfect, he replied, trying to keep the excitement from his voice. After dropping Emma at school with promises to text her updates throughout the day, Henry drove downtown with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. The consulting contract represented not just employment, but validation, proof that his skills retained value despite months of rejection and compromise. The TechNova building seemed different today, less imposing and more welcoming, as if Henry's perspective had shifted along with his circumstances. The security guard in the lobby, a friendly man named Robert who'd been working there for 15 years, actually smiled and wished Henry good luck as he headed toward the elevators. Sarah Martinez met him on the 28th floor with a kind of efficient warmth that suggested she genuinely enjoyed helping people navigate corporate bureaucracy. "Miss Sterling is in back-to-back meetings until noon," she explained, leading Henry toward a conference room. "But she wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to get started immediately." The contract was more generous than Henry had dared hope, 6 months at a consulting rate that exceeded his previous engineering salary, with performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements in building efficiency. More importantly, the scope of work described in the technical appendix read like a dream assignment: full access to building systems, authority to recommend modifications, and collaboration with TechNova's engineering teams on long-term optimization strategies. "There's one unusual element to your assignment," Sarah mentioned as Henry signed the final page. "Miss Sterling has arranged for you to shadow our senior facilities manager for the first week, but starting this afternoon you'll have complete autonomy to assess our systems and develop your recommendations." Unusual indeed. Most consulting arrangements involved layers of oversight and approval processes designed to protect companies from expensive mistakes. Victoria Sterling was essentially giving Henry the keys to TechNova's entire building infrastructure and trusting him to identify problems that had stumped more experienced firms. The senior facilities manager turned out to be a woman named Patricia Wong, a 20-year veteran of commercial building operations who greeted Henry with the skeptical warmth of someone who'd seen many consultants promise revolutionary improvements before disappearing with hefty fees and minimal results. "Miss Sterling says you have some interesting ideas about system integration," Patricia said as they began their tour of the building's mechanical levels. "I'm curious to hear your perspective, but I should warn you that we've already had 3 consulting firms tell us our problems are unsolvable without major capital investment." Henry followed Patricia through corridors lined with pipes, ducts, and electrical conduits that formed the hidden circulatory system of the 32-story building. The mechanical spaces were impressively organized, with clear labeling and maintenance logs that suggested Patricia ran a tight operation. But as they progressed through different zones, Henry began noticing patterns that the previous consultants had apparently missed. "Patricia, who designed the integration between your HVAC zones and your lighting controls?" he asked, stopping beside a junction box where multiple systems converged. "Different contractors," she replied. "The HVAC was installed by Thermal Dynamics, lighting by Illumination Solutions, and security by Safeguard Systems. Why?" Henry pointed to a series of sensors that seemed to be working at cross purposes. "Your occupancy sensors are triggering lighting changes that conflict with temperature control algorithms. When someone enters a zone, the lights come on immediately, but the HVAC system doesn't adjust for the additional heat load until 5 minutes later. That delay creates efficiency losses that compound throughout the building." Patricia studied the junction box with new interest. The previous consultants focused on individual system performance. They never mentioned integration conflicts. "Because they were specialists," Henry explained. "HVAC consultants look at heating and cooling. Lighting consultants examine illumination efficiency, but nobody's thinking about how these systems affect each other in real time." They spent the next 3 hours touring every mechanical level, with Henry documenting integration points and asking questions that revealed his growing understanding of the building's operational complexity. Patricia's initial skepticism gradually transformed into genuine interest as Henry identified issue after issue that previous assessments had overlooked. "Mr. Fowler," Patricia said as they completed their tour, "I've been managing building systems for 2 decades, and I've never had anyone explain these interactions so clearly. How long would it take you to develop comprehensive recommendations?" 2 weeks for a complete assessment," Henry replied, "but I could provide preliminary recommendations for your most critical inefficiencies within 3 days. What would you need from me?" "Access to your system documentation, historical performance data, and permission to run some diagnostic tests during off-peak hours." Patricia's expression suggested she was already mentally rearranging her schedule to accommodate Henry's requests. "I'll have everything ready for you tomorrow morning." "And Mr. Fowler, thank you. It's been frustrating to know our systems aren't performing optimally without understanding why." As Henry prepared to leave, Patricia walked him to the elevator bank and paused with the expression of someone deciding whether to share confidential information. "Miss Sterling specifically requested that I give you complete access to our operations," she said quietly. "That's unusual for a consulting arrangement. She must have seen something impressive in your background." "I'm not sure what she saw," Henry admitted, "but I'm grateful for the opportunity to prove that her confidence wasn't misplaced." The drive home gave Henry time to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. This morning, he'd been an unemployed single father with 47 rejection letters and a dwindling bank account. Tonight, he was a consulting engineer with access to one of Sacramento's most sophisticated building systems and the authority to implement improvements that could save hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. But more than the professional validation was the sense that his skills mattered again, that the knowledge he'd accumulated over years of education and experience could be applied to solve real problems with measurable impact. The 18 months of cleaning offices and submitting applications had felt like professional purgatory. Today marked his return to meaningful work. Emma was waiting at the school entrance with barely contained excitement, her backpack bulging with homework and her face glowing with anticipation. "Dad, how was your first day? Did you get to fix anything? Are you officially an engineer again?" "Officially, I'm a consulting engineer," Henry replied, enjoying the way the title sounded when spoken aloud. "And yes, I think I'm going to be able to fix quite a few things." "Tell me everything," Emma demanded as they walked toward the car. "What kind of systems? What's broken? How are you going to fix them?" Henry found himself describing building automation and system integration with the enthusiasm he'd once reserved for discussing Emma's school projects. She listened with the focused attention she brought to all technical subjects, asking questions that demonstrated her growing understanding of engineering principles. "So you're going to make the building smarter by teaching its different parts to communicate better?" she summarized. "That's exactly right. Buildings are like organisms. All the different systems need to work together efficiently, or the whole structure suffers. Like how my wind turbine design had to consider blade aerodynamics and generator efficiency and structural stability all at the same time? Exactly like that. You understand system thinking better than most adults." Emma beamed with pride, then grew thoughtful. "Dad, does this mean we can afford for me to enter the state science fair if I qualify?" "Emma, this means we can afford a lot of things we couldn't afford before. Your science fair entry, a better apartment, maybe even a vacation somewhere on your dream map." "Really? Like, really, really?" "Really, really. Your faith in your dad finally paid off." That evening, as Henry reviewed Patricia Wong's system documentation and Emma worked on her turbine calculations, both of them bent over their respective technical challenges at the kitchen table. Henry felt something he hadn't experienced since Rebecca's death: genuine contentment about the present and optimism about the future. The 48th application had not only yielded employment, but had restored his sense of professional identity and his confidence in his ability to provide Emma with the opportunities she deserved. Victoria Sterling had seen potential where others had seen only desperation, and tomorrow, Henry would begin proving that her instincts had been correct. The manila envelope that had arrived Tuesday morning now seemed like the first piece of evidence that life could indeed change dramatically and unexpectedly, that sometimes patience and persistence were rewarded with opportunities that exceeded even optimistic expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the beginning of real work, But tonight, Henry allowed himself to enjoy the simple satisfaction of being valued for what he could contribute rather than pitied for what he had lost. The first week of Henry's consulting assignment passed in a blur of technical discovery and growing excitement. Each morning brought new insights into TechNova's building systems, and each evening found him filling notebooks with observations that Patricia Wong reviewed with increasing enthusiasm. By Friday afternoon, Henry had identified 17 separate integration conflicts that were collectively costing the company nearly $40,000 annually in energy and efficiency. "These preliminary findings are remarkable," Patricia said, reviewing Henry's initial report in her cluttered office on the building's mechanical level. "The lighting HVAC timing conflicts alone could save us $15,000 a year if we implement your recommended adjustments." Henry felt the familiar satisfaction that came from solving complex problems, a feeling he'd almost forgotten during months of menial labor and fruitless job applications. The solutions are actually straightforward once you understand the interaction patterns. Most of these issues could be resolved with software modifications rather than hardware replacement. How soon could you have comprehensive recommendations ready? "I'd like another week to complete my analysis, but I could present preliminary solutions to your engineering team by Wednesday if that would be helpful." Patricia nodded enthusiastically. "Miss Sterling has been asking for updates on your progress. She seems particularly interested in your approach to problem solving." Victoria Sterling remained something of an enigma to Henry. Despite her initial enthusiasm for his unconventional hiring, she'd been largely absent during his first week, traveling to client meetings and leaving only brief messages of encouragement through Sarah Martinez. Henry had begun to wonder if her interest in his work was purely professional or if there were other factors influencing her unusual investment in his success. The answer came the following Monday when Sarah called Henry's cell phone at 7:45 a.m., just as he was preparing Emma's breakfast. "Mr. Fowler, Ms. Sterling would like you to join her for a site visit this morning. Can you meet her at the Riverside Medical Complex at 9 a.m.? The Riverside Medical Complex was one of TechNova's largest clients, a sprawling healthcare facility that consumed enormous amounts of energy maintaining precise environmental controls for various medical applications. Henry arrived to find Victoria Sterling waiting in the parking lot, dressed in practical business attire and carrying a tablet loaded with building schematics. "Thank you for meeting me here," Victoria said, her greeting warmer than their previous interactions. "I wanted to show you something that might influence your recommendations for our main building." They entered through the facility's main entrance, where Victoria was clearly expected and welcomed by the maintenance staff. As they walked through corridors lined with sophisticated medical equipment, Victoria explained the unique challenges of healthcare facility management. "Medical buildings require environmental precision that exceeds typical commercial standards," she said, pausing beside a nurse's station where monitors displayed real-time air quality data. "Temperature variations of even 2 degrees can compromise sensitive equipment or patient comfort." Henry studied the environmental monitoring displays with growing interest. "Your control systems here are more sophisticated than what I've seen in our main building. The integration between air quality management and temperature control is remarkably precise." "That's because this facility was designed as an integrated system from the beginning," Victoria explained. "We convinced the client to let us coordinate all the environmental systems during construction, rather than installing them separately." As they toured the medical complex, Henry began to understand why Victoria had brought him here. Every system worked in harmony with every other system, creating efficiency levels that exceeded industry standards, while maintaining the precise environmental controls that medical applications demanded. "This is what optimal integration looks like," Victoria said as they observed the central control room where a single operator monitored building-wide environmental systems through an elegant interface. "Energy consumption is 30% lower than comparable facilities, while environmental precision exceeds medical requirements." "It's impressive," Henry agreed. "But implementing this level of integration in an existing building would require extensive retrofitting." Victoria smiled with the expression of someone who'd been hoping for exactly that observation. "What if I told you that retrofitting might be exactly what we need?" They found a quiet conference room where Victoria opened her tablet and displayed financial projections that made Henry's breath catch. "TechNova is considering a major renovation of our main building," she explained. "Not just cosmetic improvements, but a complete overhaul of our environmental systems using lessons learned from projects like this medical complex." A project that large would cost millions, Henry said, though he was already mentally cataloging the possibilities such an undertaking would create. 7.5 million, according to preliminary estimates. But with energy savings, improved productivity, and enhanced building value, the return on investment would justify the expense within 4 years. Henry studied the projections, recognizing the careful analysis that had gone into developing these numbers. Where would I fit into a project of this magnitude? As the lead integration consultant, Victoria said, her tone carrying the weight of a significant decision. Your preliminary work has demonstrated exactly the kind of systems thinking we need for a project this complex. I want you to develop the technical specifications for our building renovation. The offer was so far beyond Henry's expectations that he found himself momentarily speechless. Lead consultant on a $7 million renovation project would restore not only his financial stability, but his professional reputation. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform his career trajectory and establish him as a recognized expert in building system integration. Miss Sterling, I'm honored by your confidence, but I should point out that I haven't managed a project of this scale before. Most of my experience has been with individual systems rather than comprehensive renovations. Victoria's expression suggested she'd expected this concern. Mr. Fowler, I've been in the construction industry for 15 years, and I've worked with dozens of consultants who had impressive credentials and extensive experience. Most of them think in terms of industry standards and conventional solutions. You think in terms of optimal performance and creative problem solving. But the technical complexity, the coordination requirements, the budget management can all be learned? Victoria interrupted gently. What can't be taught is the ability to see connections that others miss, to approach problems with fresh perspective, and to care more about finding the right solution than protecting your reputation by recommending safe alternatives. As they drove back toward downtown Sacramento, Henry's mind raced through the implications of Victoria's proposal. Managing a project of this magnitude would require skills he'd never developed, responsibilities he'd never shouldered, and decisions that could affect not only TechNova's operations, but his own professional future. But underneath the anxiety was a growing excitement about the possibility of creating something truly innovative, of applying his engineering knowledge to develop solutions that could influence how commercial buildings were designed and operated throughout the region. I'd like to accept your offer, Henry said finally, but I have one request. What's that? I'd like to bring my daughter to see the medical complex sometime. She's working on renewable energy projects for the state science fair, and seeing how integrated systems work in practice might give her ideas for her own designs. Victoria's smile was the warmest expression Henry had seen from her. I think that could be arranged. In fact, I'd be interested to hear her perspective on what we're trying to accomplish. That evening, Henry sat at the kitchen table with Emma, attempting to explain the magnitude of the opportunity Victoria Sterling had offered without overwhelming her with details she might not understand. So you're going to redesign the entire building to make it work better? Emma asked, her eyes bright with the fascination she brought to all engineering challenges. I'm going to coordinate a team that redesigns how all the building's systems work together, Henry corrected. It's like taking apart a watch and putting it back together so that all the gears mesh perfectly. That sounds amazing. And Ms. Sterling thinks you're the right person for such an important job. Apparently she does, though I'll admit it's a little intimidating. Emma studied her father's face with the careful attention she'd learned to apply when assessing his emotional state. Dad, you've been solving problems and fixing things my whole life. The only difference now is that people are finally paying attention to how good you are at it. The simple confidence in her voice reminded Henry of why he'd fought so hard to rebuild their lives after Rebecca's death. Emma's faith in his abilities had sustained him through months of rejection and compromise, and now that faith was being validated by people who understood the value of what he could contribute. You're right, he said, pulling her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. I've been solving problems my whole life. Now I get to solve them professionally. And we can finally afford for me to enter every science competition I want. Emma, we can afford for you to enter every science competition in the country if that's what you want to do. As he tucked his daughter into bed that night, Henry reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred in just 2 weeks. The consulting contract had restored his financial stability, but Victoria Sterling's confidence in his potential had given him something far more valuable, the opportunity to become the kind of professional he'd always hoped to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the beginning of the most complex project of his career. But tonight, Henry felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that persistence and patience had finally been rewarded with an opportunity that matched his ambitions. The journey from desperate job applicant to lead consultant had taken 18 months of struggle, but the destination was worth every moment of uncertainty that had preceded it. The formal offer arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered not by email or phone call but by courier in an elegant envelope bearing TechNova's corporate seal. Henry signed for the package while Emma finished her breakfast, both of them recognizing the significance of such ceremonial delivery. Inside, printed on heavy stock paper that felt substantial between his fingers, was a contract that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his professional life. Lead Systems Integration Consultant, TechNova Building Renovation Project. The title read, followed by terms that made Henry read each paragraph twice to ensure he wasn't misunderstanding the scope of what Victoria Sterling was offering. 18-month contract. Project budget authority of $7.5 million. Performance bonuses tied to energy efficiency improvements. An annual compensation package that exceeded anything Henry had earned in his previous engineering career. That's a lot of numbers with commas, Emma observed, peering over his shoulder with the unabashed curiosity that characterized her approach to most adult mysteries. It's a life-changing opportunity, Henry replied, though the phrase felt inadequate to describe what this contract represented. Miss Sterling is asking me to lead the team that will completely redesign how her building operates. Emma studied the document with the serious attention she applied to her most challenging homework assignments. Dad, do you remember when I was designing my wind turbine and I got stuck on the gear ratios? You spent 3 days calculating different configurations before you found the optimal solution. And you told me that the hardest problems are also the most rewarding to solve because they teach you things you never knew you could learn. Henry felt his throat tighten with emotion as he recognized his own words reflected back through his daughter's wisdom. That's exactly what this project represents. The hardest engineering challenge I've ever been offered, and potentially the most rewarding. Then you should sign it, Emma said with a matter-of-fact confidence that had sustained them both through months of uncertainty. Miss Sterling wouldn't have offered you something this important if she didn't believe you could do it. The signing ceremony took place in Victoria Sterling's corner office, a space that managed to feel both impressive and personal, with its combination of industry awards and family photographs. Present were Victoria, Patricia Wong, Michael Chen from TechNova's engineering department, and Sarah Martinez, who served as witness to what everyone understood was a significant moment in the company's history. Mr. Fowler, Victoria said as Henry signed the final page, I want you to understand that this contract represents more than just a business arrangement. You're going to be creating a model for how commercial buildings should operate in the 21st century. The solutions you develop here will influence projects across the industry. The weight of expectation settled on Henry's shoulders like a familiar burden, reminiscent of the responsibility he'd felt when Emma was born, and he'd realized that another person's future depended entirely on his ability to make good decisions. But alongside the pressure was an excitement he hadn't experienced since his early engineering career, when every project had felt like an opportunity to prove what he was capable of accomplishing. I appreciate your confidence, Henry replied, and I want to assure you that I understand the significance of what we're undertaking. This isn't just about improving energy efficiency. It's about demonstrating that existing buildings can be transformed to meet modern performance standards. Michael Chen, a soft-spoken engineer who'd been with TechNova for 8 years, leaned forward with obvious interest. Henry, I've reviewed your preliminary assessment, and your approach to system integration is unlike anything I've encountered. How did you develop such a comprehensive understanding of building automation interactions? Henry considered the question carefully, recognizing that his answer would establish his credibility with the engineering team he'd be leading. During my previous career, I worked on HVAC design for commercial buildings, but I was always frustrated by the lack of coordination between different systems. I spent evenings studying automation protocols and integration challenges, trying to understand why buildings with excellent individual components often performed poorly as complete systems. And now you have the opportunity to implement solutions you've been developing theoretically, Patricia added. That must be incredibly satisfying. It's terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously, Henry admitted, but I think that combination of emotions usually accompanies worthwhile challenges. Victoria smiled with the expression of someone whose instincts about people had been validated. Henry, I have one additional proposal that wasn't included in the formal contract. I'd like you to consider relocating your family to corporate housing during the renovation project. We maintain several executive apartments near the building, and having you on site would facilitate the kind of intensive collaboration this project requires. The offer caught Henry off guard, both in its generosity and its implications. Corporate housing would mean Emma could attend one of Sacramento's better schools, they'd have access to amenities they couldn't afford independently, and Henry would be available for the kind of round-the-clock problem-solving that major construction projects often demanded. That's extremely generous, Henry said, but I'd need to discuss it with Emma before making a decision. She's very attached to her current school and her teacher, Mr. Rodriguez. Of course. And if she prefers to remain at Lincoln Elementary, we could arrange transportation. The important thing is ensuring your family's comfort during what will undoubtedly be an intensive 18 months. After the signing ceremony concluded, Henry spent the afternoon touring TechNova's building with Michael Chen and Patricia Wong, beginning to develop the detailed understanding of existing systems that would inform his renovation recommendations. Each floor revealed new complexities: research laboratories with specialized environmental requirements, server rooms that demanded precise temperature control, conference facilities with sophisticated audiovisual integration. The challenge, Michael explained as they examined the building's central control room, is that each system was designed to operate independently. The HVAC controllers don't communicate with the lighting management system, the security sensors don't coordinate with occupancy detection, and the elevator controls operate on completely separate protocols. Henry studied the control panels with growing excitement, recognizing opportunities for integration that could dramatically improve both efficiency and functionality. What if we created a unified building intelligence system that could coordinate all these functions through a single interface? Theoretically possible, Patricia replied, but the programming complexity would be enormous. We'd essentially be creating a custom operating system for the entire building. Not just theoretically possible, Henry said, his confidence building as he visualized the solution. Definitely achievable. Modern building automation protocols are designed for exactly this kind of integration. The reason most buildings don't implement comprehensive coordination is cost and complexity. But if we're doing a complete renovation anyway, we can build intelligence into the infrastructure from the beginning. Michael's expression brightened with the enthusiasm of an engineer recognizing an elegant solution to a persistent problem. You're talking about creating a building that learns from occupancy patterns and adjusts all systems automatically to optimize both comfort and efficiency. Exactly. A building that responds to how people actually use the space, rather than operating according to preset schedules that may not reflect reality. As they continued their tour, Henry found himself thinking about Emma's wind turbine design and the way she'd approached the challenge of optimizing multiple variables simultaneously. Buildings were simply larger, more complex versions of the same engineering challenge. Systems with multiple inputs and outputs that needed to work together harmoniously to achieve optimal performance. That evening, over dinner at their kitchen table, Henry explained Victoria Sterling's corporate housing offer and watched Emma consider the implications with her characteristic seriousness. "Would I have to change schools immediately?" she asked. "Not necessarily. Miss Sterling said they could arrange transportation if you wanted to finish the year at Lincoln Elementary." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to complete my science fair project with Mr. Rodriguez's guidance, but after that, I think trying a new school might be an adventure, especially if the corporate housing has better internet for researching engineering projects. So you're comfortable with the idea of moving temporarily?" "Dad, you've been offered the chance to do work that could influence how buildings operate everywhere. That's incredible." "Of course I'm comfortable with whatever we need to do to make sure you can succeed." Henry marveled at his daughter's maturity and her instinctive understanding that some opportunities required sacrifice and adaptation. "Emma, I want you to know that no matter how demanding this project becomes, you're still my first priority. If the work ever interferes with your needs or your happiness, I'll make adjustments." "I know that," Emma replied with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her father's commitment to her well-being. "But I also know this is your chance to show everyone what you've always been capable of doing. I'm proud that Miss Sterling recognized how special you are." As Henry tucked Emma into bed that night, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a desperate single father applying for janitorial positions and counting rejection letters. Tonight, he was the lead consultant on a multi-million-dollar renovation project that would establish his reputation as an expert in building system integration. The transformation seemed almost too dramatic to be real, but the signed contract in his briefcase was tangible proof that persistence and expertise had finally been recognized and rewarded. Tomorrow would begin the most challenging and potentially rewarding phase of his professional life, but tonight, Henry allowed himself to enjoy the satisfaction of knowing that Emma's faith in her father had been vindicated by people who understood the value of what he could contribute. The 48th application had opened a door to possibilities that exceeded even Henry's most optimistic expectations, proving that sometimes the most significant opportunities arrived, disguised as routine chance encounters with people who possessed the wisdom to recognize potential where others saw only present circumstances. The renovation project officially launched on a Monday morning in October, with Henry standing before a conference room filled with contractors, engineers, and project managers who represented the collective expertise that would transform TechNova's building over the next 18 months. The atmosphere was charged with the particular energy that accompanied ambitious undertakings, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that Henry recognized from his engineering career but had never experienced as the person responsible for coordinating everyone's efforts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria Sterling announced from the head of the polished conference table, "I'd like you to meet Henry Fowler, our lead systems integration consultant. Henry will be coordinating all technical aspects of this renovation, ensuring that every system we install works in harmony with every other system." The introductions that followed revealed the scope of expertise Henry would be managing. Sarah Kim from Advanced HVAC Solutions, whose company specialized in cutting-edge climate control technology. David Rodriguez from Intelligent Lighting Systems, who'd pioneered adaptive illumination protocols. Jennifer Martinez from BuildSmart Automation, whose firm had developed some of the most sophisticated building intelligence software in the industry. And Marcus Thompson from Green Energy Integration, who would oversee the installation of renewable energy systems that would reduce the building's environment. "Mr. Fowler," Sarah Kim said during the break between presentations, "I've reviewed your integration specifications, and I have to say, the level of coordination you're proposing between HVAC and lighting systems is more comprehensive than anything I've implemented before. Are you confident that the software can handle that degree of real-time communication?" Henry felt the familiar flutter of nerves that accompanied moments when his theoretical knowledge would be tested against practical implementation. "The protocols exist to support that level of integration," he replied. "But you're right that we'll be pushing the technology to its limits. That's why I've proposed a phased rollout, starting with a single floor, where we can test and refine our coordination algorithms before expanding to the entire building." David Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. My experience with adaptive lighting has taught me that complex systems need time to learn building occupancy patterns before they can optimize automatically. Starting small allows us to identify problems while they're still manageable." Jennifer Martinez, whose company would be responsible for the central building intelligence system, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Henry, your specifications call for predictive optimization based on weather forecasts, occupancy history, and utility rate schedules. That's essentially creating an artificial intelligence system for building management. Have you considered the computational requirements for processing that much data in real time?" "I've been working with cloud-based processing solutions that can handle the computational load without requiring massive on-site servers," Henry replied, grateful for the evening hours he'd spent researching advanced building automation technologies. The system would use machine learning algorithms to identify patterns and optimize performance continuously, becoming more efficient over time. Marcus Thompson whistled appreciatively. "Mr. Fowler, if you can actually implement what you're describing, this building would become a showcase for intelligent environmental control. We're talking about technology that could revolutionize how commercial buildings operate." The first month of renovation work proceeded with the kind of controlled chaos that characterized major construction projects. Henry found himself working 12-hour days, coordinating between contractors, solving integration challenges as they arose, and maintaining the delicate balance between innovation and practicality that successful engineering projects required. The corporate apartment Victoria had arranged proved invaluable, providing him with a 5-minute commute that allowed him to be on-site whenever problems emerged. Emma adapted to their temporary relocation with characteristic resilience, enrolling at Riverside Academy, the school whose advanced STEM program challenged her in ways that Lincoln Elementary never could. Her new teacher, Dr. Patricia Collins, was a former aerospace engineer who recognized Emma's exceptional aptitude, and encouraged her to tackle increasingly sophisticated projects. "Dad, look at this," Emma announced one evening, spreading engineering drawings across their temporary dining table. "Dr. Collins helped me design a wind turbine with variable pitch blades that automatically adjust to wind conditions. It's like what you're doing with the building, making systems smart enough to optimize themselves." Henry studied his daughter's drawings with growing amazement. The design incorporated concepts that he hadn't encountered until graduate-level engineering courses. Yet Emma had grasped the principles intuitively and applied them with impressive sophistication. "This is remarkable work," he said, meaning every word. "Your turbine design is more advanced than some commercial installations I've seen. Dr. Collins says I should submit it to the National Junior Engineering Competition. The deadline is in 3 months, and the winner gets a full scholarship to engineering camp at MIT next summer." The prospect of Emma attending engineering camp at MIT would have seemed impossibly expensive just 6 months ago, but Henry's renovation project salary made such opportunities not only affordable, but encouraged. "I think you should definitely submit your design. In fact, I'd like Dr. Collins to review the integration concepts I'm using in the building renovation. You two might have insights that could improve both projects." Meanwhile, the building renovation was generating attention that extended far beyond TechNova. Architecture and engineering magazines had begun featuring articles about the project, describing it as a pioneering example of comprehensive building intelligence implementation. Henry found himself being interviewed by reporters and invited to speak at industry conferences, experiences that both thrilled and terrified him. "Henry, you're becoming something of a celebrity in building automation circles," Victoria observed during one of their weekly project reviews. "The National Association of Building Engineers wants you to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference in Denver next month." "I'm flattered by the invitation," Henry replied, "but I'm not sure I'm qualified to address industry leaders. 6 months ago, I was applying for janitorial positions." Victoria's expression carried the kind of patient wisdom that successful executives develop through years of managing talented but insecure professionals. "Henry, your qualifications aren't determined by your employment history. They're determined by your ability to solve problems that others haven't been able to solve. The fact that you approached building integration from a position of necessity rather than academic theory is exactly what makes your perspective valuable." The truth of her observation became apparent as the renovation progressed, and Henry's integration solutions proved not only technically sound but remarkably effective. The first floor, which served as their testing ground for new systems, was achieving energy efficiency improvements that exceeded their most optimistic projections, while maintaining environmental comfort that surpassed the building's previous performance. "These numbers are incredible," Patricia Wong reported during a team meeting in November. "Energy consumption is down 38%, but occupant satisfaction surveys show the highest comfort ratings we've ever recorded. The integration is working exactly as Henry predicted." Michael Chen nodded enthusiastically. "The lighting system's ability to coordinate with HVAC controls is creating efficiency gains that compound throughout the day. When the lights dim automatically in response to natural illumination, the HVAC system immediately adjusts for reduced heat load. It's like the building is thinking." "That's exactly what we wanted to achieve," Henry said, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing theoretical concepts translate into measurable improvements. "A building that responds intelligently to changing conditions rather than operating according to static programming." The success of the first phase led to accelerated implementation throughout the building, with each floor bringing new challenges and opportunities for innovation. Henry's days were filled with technical problem-solving, team coordination, and the kind of creative engineering work that had originally drawn him to the profession. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of the project was sharing the experience with Emma, who had become his unofficial consultant on systems thinking and optimization strategies. Their evening conversations about engineering challenges had evolved into collaborative sessions, where Emma's fresh perspective often illuminated solutions that Henry's experience-based assumptions had obscured. "Dad," Emma said one evening as they reviewed the building's performance data together, "what if the system could learn from seasonal patterns and begin adjusting proactively for weather changes instead of just reacting to them?" "That's called predictive optimization," Henry replied, "and it's actually the next phase of development we're planning to implement." "Could I help design the algorithms? Dr. Collins has been teaching us about machine learning in our advanced math class, and I think I understand how pattern recognition could be applied to building automation." Henry looked at his 11-year-old daughter, whose engineering intuition continued to amaze him, and realized that their shared journey through this project was creating something more valuable than professional success or financial security. It was demonstrating to Emma that intelligence, creativity, and persistence could transform impossible dreams into measurable reality. "I think having you contribute to the predictive optimization algorithms would be incredibly valuable," he said. "In fact, I suspect your insights might be exactly what we need to take this project from successful to revolutionary." As winter approached and the renovation entered its most intensive phase, Henry reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in his life over the past 6 months. The desperate father who had applied for a janitorial position had evolved into a recognized expert whose work was influencing how buildings would be designed and operated throughout the industry. But more important than professional recognition was the knowledge that his success was creating opportunities for Emma that would have been unimaginable during their months of struggle and uncertainty. Her engineering talent was flourishing in an environment where intellectual curiosity was celebrated and challenging projects were considered normal rather than exceptional. The 48th application had opened more than just a door to employment. It had revealed a path toward the kind of life Henry had always hoped to provide for his daughter, where financial security enabled intellectual exploration and professional achievement created platforms for continued growth and contribution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the renovation entered its most complex phase, but tonight, Henry felt the deep contentment that came from knowing that persistence and expertise had finally been rewarded with opportunities that matched his ambitions and his daughter's potential. The anonymous email arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, buried among Henry's routine project correspondence but marked with the kind of urgent subject line that demanded immediate attention. TechNova Project, information you need to see. Henry almost deleted it as spam, but something about the timing, arriving just as the renovation project was gaining national recognition, made him pause and open the message. What he found inside made his blood run cold. The email contained no sender identification, just a collection of forwarded internal documents from TechNova's board of directors that revealed a conspiracy Henry had never suspected. Board meeting minutes from October showed discussions about managing the Fowler situation and containing project scope creep. Email exchanges between board members described Henry's comprehensive integration approach as unnecessarily expensive and detailed plans to scale back the renovation once it had generated sufficient positive publicity for the company. The building intelligence system Fowler is proposing will create ongoing maintenance costs that exceed projected savings, read one email from board member Robert Walsh. We should allow him to complete the initial installation for marketing purposes, then gradually reduce system complexity to minimize long-term operational expenses. Another email thread, marked confidential, outlined a strategy for replacing Henry with a less ambitious consultant. Once the project's public relations value had been maximized, Fowler's integration specifications are impressive but impractical for long-term implementation, wrote board member Margaret Stevens. We need someone who understands that corporate sustainability means balancing innovation with profitability. The most damaging document was a cost-benefit analysis that revealed the board's true intentions. While publicly supporting the comprehensive renovation, they had secretly commissioned alternative proposals that would gut most of Henry's integration features while maintaining the appearance of advanced building automation. The savings would be substantial, nearly $2 million, but would transform the innovative intelligence system into a conventional upgrade with minimal environmental impact. Henry's hands shook as he forwarded the documents to his personal email account, recognizing that he was looking at evidence of corporate betrayal that could destroy not only his project, but his newly restored professional reputation. Everything he'd built over the past 6 months, the recognition, the conference invitations, the industry acclaim, was apparently based on a facade that the board planned to dismantle once they'd extracted maximum publicity value. The timing couldn't have been worse. That afternoon, Henry was scheduled to present the project's progress to a group of potential investors interested in funding similar renovations in other buildings. Victoria Sterling had positioned the presentation as a crucial opportunity to expand TechNova's building intelligence services into a profitable consulting division. If the board was planning to sabotage the project, Henry would be presenting solutions that his own company intended to abandon. "Dad, you look like someone stole your lunch money," Emma observed as she prepared for school, her backpack loaded with materials for the engineering competition she'd been preparing for months to enter. "Just some work complications," Henry replied, not wanting to burden his daughter with corporate politics she couldn't understand or influence. "Complicated like when my wind turbine calculations weren't working, or complicated like when the building systems aren't talking to each other properly." Henry marveled at Emma's ability to categorize problems in terms she could analyze and potentially solve. More like when people aren't talking to each other properly. Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all technical challenges. In engineering, when communication protocols break down, you either fix the interface or replace the components that aren't compatible with the system. The innocence of her observation hit Henry with unexpected force. Emma was right. In technical systems, incompatible components were replaced rather than accommodated. But in corporate environments, the politics were more complex, and the stakes often extended beyond optimal performance to include relationships, reputation, and future opportunities. Henry spent the morning reviewing the renovation project's current status, trying to understand which elements the board might consider expendable and which features they viewed as essential for maintaining their public commitments. The building intelligence system was performing exactly as designed, achieving energy savings that exceeded projections, while providing environmental comfort that had generated overwhelmingly positive feedback from occupants. But he also recognized that the board's concerns about long-term costs weren't entirely unreasonable. The comprehensive integration he'd designed required sophisticated maintenance protocols and ongoing software updates that would indeed create expenses extending far beyond the initial installation. A simpler system would provide adequate energy savings while reducing operational complexity. The moral dimension of the situation became clear as Henry considered his options. He could confront Victoria Sterling directly with the leaked documents, potentially destroying relationships he'd worked months to build. He could modify his specifications to address the board's cost concerns, sacrificing innovation for corporate harmony. Or he could proceed with the investor presentation as planned, knowing that he might be promoting solutions his own company intended to undermine. The answer came during his lunch break, when Emma called from school with excitement that temporarily pushed corporate politics from his mind. "Dad, Dr. Collins just told me that my wind turbine design has been selected as a finalist for the National Junior Engineering Competition. I'm one of only 12 students chosen from across the entire country." "Emma, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." The final competition is in Washington, D.C. next month, and the winner gets to present their project to a committee of engineers from NASA and the Department of Energy. Can you believe it? Henry felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized that Emma's success was occurring just as his own professional achievement was being threatened by corporate manipulation. "I'm so proud of your work, and I can't wait to see you compete at the national level." "Dad, there's something else. Dr. Collins wants to include my project in a documentary about young innovators that PBS is producing. They want to interview both of us about how families can work together on engineering challenges." The irony was overwhelming. Just as Emma was being recognized for engineering excellence that had been nurtured by their shared work on the building project, Henry was discovering that the project itself might be a corporate deception designed to generate publicity rather than implement genuine innovation. That afternoon's investor presentation proceeded exactly as Henry had prepared, with comprehensive demonstrations of the building's integrated systems and detailed projections of energy savings and operational improvements. The potential investors responded with enthusiasm that bordered on excitement, asking technical questions that revealed their sophisticated understanding of building automation technologies. "Mr. Fowler," said Jennifer Walsh, a venture capitalist whose firm specialized in sustainable technology investments, "your integration approach represents exactly the kind of systematic thinking that the building industry needs. How quickly could you implement similar systems in other commercial buildings?" Henry answered her questions with the technical accuracy and professional enthusiasm that the project deserved. But underneath his presentation was the growing recognition that he might be promoting solutions that TechNova had no intention of supporting beyond their current marketing value. The investors' response exceeded Victoria Sterling's most optimistic expectations. By the end of the presentation, 3 different firms had expressed interest in funding building intelligence retrofits, with potential contracts totaling more than $15 million in renovation work. "Henry, this is extraordinary," Victoria said as the investors departed with commitments to submit formal proposals within 2 weeks. "You've essentially created a new division for our company based on the success of this single project." The success should have felt triumphant, but Henry found himself wondering whether Victoria was aware of her board's intentions or if she was as much a victim of corporate manipulation as he was. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, but the leaked documents suggested that even the CEO might not be fully informed about the board's long-term plans. That evening, as Henry helped Emma prepare for her trip to Washington, D.C., he found himself thinking about the parallel between his daughter's engineering competition and his own professional situation. Emma was competing based on the merit of her work, with judges who would evaluate her project according to technical excellence and innovative thinking. But Henry's project was being evaluated according to corporate politics and profit margins that had nothing to do with engineering quality or environmental impact. "Dad, are you going to be able to come to my competition?" Emma asked as she packed her presentation materials with the methodical care she applied to all important tasks. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Henry replied, realizing that his daughter's achievement represented something pure and honest in a way that his corporate success apparently didn't. "Good, because I want you to see me present the wind turbine design that was inspired by watching you solve building integration problems. In my presentation, I'm going to explain how engineers can learn from each other across different specialties." As Henry tucked Emma into bed that night, he realized that the anonymous email had forced him to confront a choice that would define not only his career, but the example he set for his daughter. He could accept corporate compromise as the price of professional success, or he could fight for the principles that had motivated his work from the beginning. Tomorrow he would need to decide whether to confront Victoria Sterling with evidence of her board's betrayal, and whether to risk everything he'd rebuilt in defense of solutions that might benefit buildings and communities far beyond TechNova's immediate interests. The 48th application had opened a door to opportunities that exceeded his expectations, but it had also revealed that corporate success sometimes required navigating political complexities that had nothing to do with engineering excellence or environmental responsibility. Emma's wind turbine design represented the kind of innovation that emerged from pure technical thinking, uncomplicated by profit margins or marketing strategies. Perhaps it was time for Henry to remember that engineering excellence was its own justification, regardless of the corporate context in which it was implemented. The confrontation Henry had been dreading arrived with brutal timing on the same morning Emma was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for the National Junior Engineering Competition. At 7:30 a.m., just as Henry was helping Emma pack her final presentation materials, his phone rang with a call from Victoria Sterling that would force him to choose between his daughter's biggest moment and potentially saving his project from corporate sabotage. "Henry, we have an emergency." Victoria's voice carried an edge of controlled panic that Henry had never heard before. "3 board members are calling for an immediate review of the renovation project. They're questioning cost overruns and demanding modifications to your integration specifications. I need you here within the hour." Henry glanced at Emma, who was carefully arranging her wind turbine prototype in its protective case, her face glowing with the excitement of someone about to compete at the highest level of her field. Her flight departed at noon, and Henry had promised to drive her to the airport and see her off with the kind of parental support that such moments required. "Victoria, today is Emma's national competition. I promised I'd take her to the airport. Henry, if we don't address the board's concerns immediately, they're threatening to halt the project and terminate your contract. Robert Walsh is pushing for a complete audit of your specifications, and Margaret Stevens is suggesting we bring in alternative consultants to evaluate cost-effectiveness." The leaked documents suddenly made perfect sense. The board wasn't simply planning to scale back the project after it generated publicity. They were actively working to discredit Henry's work and justify replacing him with consultants who would implement their cheaper, less comprehensive alternatives. "Dad, what's wrong?" Emma asked, recognizing the tension in his voice despite his attempts to keep the conversation professional. Henry covered the phone and looked at his daughter, whose trust in his ability to balance work responsibilities with parental commitments had never wavered despite the demands of the renovation project. "There's a problem at work that requires immediate attention." Emma's expression shifted from excitement to concern as she processed the implications. "The kind of problem that might make you miss taking me to the airport? I don't know yet. Give me a moment to understand the situation." Henry returned to his conversation with Victoria, who was still explaining the board's sudden urgency. "They've scheduled an emergency meeting for 9 a.m., and they're demanding comprehensive documentation of every integration specification you've implemented. Henry, I think someone has been undermining your work behind the scenes." Victoria, I need to ask you something directly. Are you aware that some board members have been discussing plans to scale back the project after it generates sufficient publicity? The silence that followed Henry's question lasted long enough to confirm his suspicions. When Victoria finally responded, her voice carried the weariness of someone who had been fighting battles she couldn't discuss openly. How did you find out about that? Someone sent me copies of internal board communications, email exchanges discussing cost reduction strategies and plans to replace me with less ambitious consultants. Henry, I've been trying to protect this project from those influences, but Walsh and Stevens have been building opposition to your comprehensive approach since October. They want the marketing benefits of appearing innovative without the long-term commitment to genuine building intelligence. Emma approached Henry with the careful expression she wore when she needed to say something important but wasn't sure how adults would react. Dad, can I suggest something? Henry nodded, grateful for any perspective that might help him navigate this impossible situation. In engineering competitions, judges sometimes try to pressure you into compromising your design to make it cheaper or simpler. But the best projects are the ones where people refuse to compromise their technical integrity, even when it's difficult. The wisdom of an 11-year-old applied to corporate politics with devastating accuracy. Emma was right. The board's pressure was essentially asking Henry to compromise his technical integrity for the sake of corporate convenience. Emma, what if choosing technical integrity means I might miss your biggest competition? Dad, you've taught me that doing the right thing sometimes requires sacrifice. If your building project helps other buildings work better, that's more important than me being nervous at the airport. Besides, Dr. Collins is traveling with our team, and she'll take good care of me. Henry felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized that his daughter was not only supporting his professional decision, but demonstrating the kind of principled thinking that he hoped the renovation project would embody. Victoria, I'll be there in 45 minutes, but I need you to understand that I'm not willing to compromise the technical specifications that make this project genuinely innovative. If the board wants to replace me for refusing to lower standards, that's their choice. Henry, are you sure? Fighting the board could cost you everything we've built together. What we've built together is proof that comprehensive building intelligence is achievable and beneficial. If TechNova doesn't want to support that innovation, other companies will. After ending the call, Henry spent 20 minutes helping Emma make final preparations for her trip, ensuring that her presentation materials were perfectly organized, and that she had everything she needed for 3 days in Washington, D.C. Dad, I want you to know that I'm proud of you for choosing to fight for your project, Emma said as they loaded her luggage into the car for the drive to the airport. Even if it means you can't see me off personally. Emma, there's something I need to tell you. The reason I'm fighting for this project isn't just about engineering excellence. It's about proving that people can create innovative solutions when they're given the opportunity and support to do their best work. Your success in this competition represents the same principle, that genuine talent deserves recognition and support. At the airport, Henry watched Emma join her team with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Dr. Collins approached him with the kind of understanding that suggested she recognized the difficulty of his decision. Mr. Fowler, Emma has told me about the work you're doing on building systems integration. She's incredibly proud of your achievements, and she understands that sometimes important work requires difficult choices. Dr. Collins, please take good care of her. This competition means everything to Emma. I will, and Mr. Fowler, Emma's project is remarkable. She's going to represent herself and your family with excellence. The drive from the airport to TechNova gave Henry time to prepare for the confrontation that would determine not only his professional future, but the fate of innovations that could influence how commercial buildings operated throughout the industry. The leaked documents had revealed the scope of the opposition he faced, but Emma's courage in pursuing her own engineering excellence had reminded him that some principles were worth defending, regardless of personal cost. The emergency board meeting was already in session when Henry arrived, with Victoria Sterling facing hostile questions from Robert Walsh and Margaret Stevens, while other board members listened with expressions that ranged from skeptical to sympathetic. Mr. Fowler, thank you for joining us, Walsh said, with the false courtesy that preceded corporate character assassination. We've been discussing concerns about cost overruns and technical complexity in your renovation specifications. I'm happy to address any specific concerns, Henry replied, setting his briefcase on the conference table with deliberate calm. Our concern, Stevens interjected, is that your integration approach is creating ongoing operational expenses that will exceed the project's energy savings. We need solutions that are sustainable from a business perspective, not just an environmental one. Henry recognized the moment that would define everything that followed. He could acquiesce to the board's demands and preserve his position while compromising his technical integrity. Or he could defend the innovations that represented his best professional work and risk losing everything he'd rebuilt over the past year. Ms. Stevens, Mr. Walsh, I understand your concerns about long-term costs. But I need you to understand that the comprehensive integration we've implemented isn't just about energy savings. It's about creating a model for how buildings should operate in the 21st century. Scaling back these innovations would not only compromise TechNova's environmental commitments, but would waste the opportunity to establish your company as a leader in building intelligence technology. The room fell silent as Henry's words hung in the air like a challenge that demanded response. Outside the conference room windows, Sacramento stretched toward the horizon, filled with buildings that could benefit from the innovations that TechNova was considering abandoning for the sake of short-term cost savings. In Washington, D.C., Emma was probably preparing for her first presentation to judges who would evaluate her work based purely on technical merit and innovative thinking. The parallel was both inspiring and heartbreaking. His daughter was competing in an environment where excellence was its own justification, while Henry was fighting to preserve innovations in a context where corporate politics trumped engineering quality. The next few minutes would determine whether Henry's commitment to technical excellence would be rewarded or punished, and whether TechNova would become a model for sustainable building innovation or another example of corporate compromise triumphing over genuine progress. The silence in the TechNova boardroom stretched for nearly 30 seconds, each board member calculating the political and financial implications of Henry's challenge. Robert Walsh leaned back in his leather chair with the expression of someone who had expected capitulation rather than defiance, while Margaret Stevens shuffled through documents that Henry recognized as the alternative proposals designed to gut his integration specifications. Mr. Fowler, Walsh said finally, his tone carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to having his cost-cutting recommendations accepted without debate, your passion for this project is admirable, but we have fiduciary responsibilities that extend beyond environmental idealism. The comprehensive integration you're proposing would commit TechNova to maintenance expenses that could exceed $500,000 annually. Those maintenance expenses, Henry replied, his voice steady despite the stakes involved, would be offset by energy savings, improved productivity, and the competitive advantage of operating the most intelligent commercial building in the region. But more importantly, they represent an investment in establishing TechNova as the industry leader in building automation consulting. Victoria Sterling had remained silent during the exchange, but Henry could see her calculating the political dynamics around the table. 3 board members appeared sympathetic to Henry's position, 2 were clearly aligned with Walsh and Stevens, and 1 seemed genuinely undecided about which approach would best serve the company's long-term interests. The consulting revenue projections are impressive, admitted board member Jennifer Park, reviewing the investor presentation materials from the previous week. $15 million in potential contracts based on replicating this building's systems in other commercial properties. That represents significant growth opportunity. Stevens shifted in her chair with obvious irritation. Projections that assume we can actually deliver the comprehensive integration Mr. Fowler is promoting. If these systems prove too complex or expensive to maintain, we'll be promising solutions we can't sustain. Henry recognized the crucial moment when corporate decision-making balanced between innovation and risk aversion. Everything he'd built over the past year, his reputation, his family's financial security, his daughter's educational opportunities, hung in the balance of whether these board members would choose long-term vision over short-term cost control. If I may, Henry said, opening his briefcase and withdrawing a tablet loaded with real-time performance data from the building's integrated systems. Rather than debating theoretical concerns, perhaps we should examine actual results. He connected the tablet to the conference room's display system, revealing dashboard screens that showed energy consumption, environmental comfort metrics, and system efficiency measurements updated every few minutes. The numbers were extraordinary, energy costs down 42% from the previous year, while occupant satisfaction surveys showed the highest ratings in the building's history. These aren't projections, Henry continued. This is measurable proof that comprehensive integration works exactly as designed. The building is currently saving $1,700 per day in energy costs, while providing environmental comfort that exceeds previous standards. Board member Michael Torres leaned forward with obvious interest. Mr. Fowler, these results are remarkable. How confident are you that these performance levels are sustainable long-term? The system is designed to improve over time through machine learning algorithms that optimize performance based on occupancy patterns and weather forecasts. What you're seeing now represents baseline efficiency that will continue increasing as the building intelligence learns from operational experience. Victoria Sterling chose this moment to speak, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made a decision that would define her company's future. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to recognize what Mr. Fowler has accomplished here. This isn't just a successful renovation. It's a proof of concept that could revolutionize how our industry approaches building automation. Walsh's expression hardened as he realized that Victoria was choosing innovation over the cost-cutting measures he'd been advocating. Victoria, with respect, revolutionary ideas often come with revolutionary costs. We need to consider whether TechNova can afford to be pioneers in unproven technology. Mr. Walsh, Henry said, his patience finally giving way to frustration. The technology isn't unproven. It's working right now in this building, saving money and improving performance every day. The question isn't whether we can afford to implement these solutions, but whether we can afford to abandon them after demonstrating their effectiveness. The room fell silent again, but this time the quiet carried a different energy, the weight of recognition that Henry was right about the stakes involved. TechNova had invested nearly $8 million in proving that comprehensive building intelligence was achievable and beneficial. Scaling back now would not only waste that investment, but would signal to the industry that the company lacked commitment to the innovations it had promoted. Jennifer Park broke the silence with a question that cut to the heart of the debate. Mr. Fowler, if TechNova were to support your comprehensive integration approach, how quickly could you train other consultants to implement similar systems in additional buildings? Henry felt his pulse quicken as he recognized that the conversation had shifted from whether to preserve his innovations to how to scale them across multiple projects. With proper documentation and training protocols, I could prepare a team of integration specialists within 6 months. The key is ensuring that each consultant understands both the technical requirements and the systematic thinking that makes comprehensive integration successful. And the market demand for these services? Based on the investor response to last week's presentation, demand exceeds our current capacity to deliver. We could build a consulting division around building intelligence that generates more revenue than TechNova's traditional construction services. Victoria Sterling smiled with the expression of someone whose strategic instincts had been validated by circumstances. Henry, I'd like you to prepare a comprehensive proposal for expanding our building intelligence consulting services. Include staffing requirements, training protocols, and revenue projections for the next 3 years. Walsh made one final attempt to maintain opposition. Victoria, we're talking about committing the company to a completely new business model based on one successful project. Robert, we're talking about capitalizing on a breakthrough that positions TechNova as the industry leader in the fastest-growing segment of commercial construction. Henry has proven that his approach works. Now we need to decide whether we're courageous enough to build our future around that success. The formal vote was 7-2 in favor of supporting Henry's comprehensive integration approach and developing TechNova's building intelligence consulting division. Walsh and Stevens registered their opposition for the record, but the majority decision was clear. Innovation would triumph over cost-cutting, and Henry's vision would become the foundation for the company's future growth. As the meeting concluded, and board members departed with promises to review Henry's expansion proposal, Victoria approached him with an expression that combined relief and determination. Henry, I want you to know that this decision wasn't just about business strategy. It was about proving that TechNova is the kind of company that supports genuine innovation, even when it requires courage and commitment. Victoria, I appreciate your faith in my work, but I need to be honest. I was prepared to resign rather than compromise the technical integrity of this project. I know that's exactly why I fought for you. People who are willing to sacrifice personal security for professional principles are exactly the kind of leaders we need. Henry's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Collins in Washington, D.C. Emma's presentation was extraordinary. She's advanced to the final round tomorrow. She wanted you to know that she's proud of her engineer father. The timing was perfect. Just as Henry was securing the future of his building intelligence innovations, Emma was proving her own engineering excellence on the national stage. Both of them had chosen technical integrity over compromise, and both were being rewarded for their commitment to pursuing solutions that exceeded conventional standards. That evening, Henry called Emma from his corporate apartment, where celebration was tempered by the recognition that real success required ongoing effort rather than single moments of triumph. Dad, Dr. Collins told me about your board meeting. I'm proud that you stood up for your project. Emma, I'm proud that you're representing our family with such excellence in Washington. How are you feeling about tomorrow's final competition? Nervous but excited. The other projects are incredible, but I know my wind turbine design is solid. Just like I knew your building project was solid, even when people were questioning it. As Henry prepared for sleep that night, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had transformed him from a desperate job applicant to a recognized leader in building automation technology. The 48th application had opened not just employment opportunities, but a path toward the kind of professional fulfillment that made struggle and sacrifice meaningful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he developed plans for expanding TechNova's consulting services, but tonight Henry felt the deep satisfaction that came from proving that persistence, expertise, and integrity could overcome even determined corporate opposition. Emma's wind turbine competed against the nation's best young engineers, while Henry's building intelligence systems were being recognized as models for industry transformation. Both achievements represented the same fundamental principle, that innovative thinking, supported by technical excellence and unwavering commitment, could create solutions that exceeded everyone's expectations. The desperate father who had applied for a janitorial position 18 months earlier had become a leader whose work would influence how buildings operated across the country. But more importantly, he had shown his daughter that dreams supported by knowledge, effort, and courage could indeed become reality, regardless of how impossible they might initially appear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.